In this lesson, we're going to be talking about penetration testing and some of the details around how it works and logistics and specifically things like scope. So what is penetration testing? Well, not surprisingly, it's testing to see if you can penetrate something, which means you're going to check to see whether you can break into a particular thing, whether it's a server or an application. Depending on the type of engagement you've got, you may have the ability to try to break in physically to a location. But primarily, what you're going to be doing with penetration testing is you're going to be trying to break into systems and networks and applications. That's kind of what it's all about. This may actually involve social engineering attacks, so it may require you to make a phone call to somebody and get them to give you their username and password, or some other type of social engineering attack where maybe you send a URL via a crafted email. Sometimes it's just strictly a technical approach where you're running scans and you're running Metasploit and you're gaining access that way, or maybe some other type of technical application sort of connection. Sometimes it's physical access that you need. So in order to get access to a particular system, if you can get physical access, then maybe you can get in. So what are the goals of penetration testing? Well, the goals would be to assess weaknesses in an organization's security posture. You want to figure out where they're vulnerable so they can go fix these problems. You want to help them understand their risk position better and what they can or may be able to do to mitigate those risks. And ultimately, you want to be able to access systems in a particular way to find weaknesses. So those are really sort of the goals of penetration testing. From a results standpoint, when you're done your testing, what are you going to do? Well, you're probably going to generate a report. And by that, I don't mean you're going to run some automated tool and you're going to get it to generate a report for you and you're going to give that to the client and then they're going to write you a really large check. That's not really how it works. You're going to write a report detailing the findings in a detailed way. So what did you find? How did you find it? How can you go mitigate that particular risk? So you should really include remediation activities in order to fix the vulnerabilities that you find. It's pretty easy to walk around going, hey, that's a problem, and that's a problem, and that's a problem. There's really not a lot of value in that. Where there's value is, hey, that's a problem, and here is how you can go about fixing it. So let's talk about scope. How big is the breadbox? And specifically, what is it that the two of you have agreed to? So you as the penetration tester and them as the target organization or the client, what have you agreed to? Are there any exclusions? Are there any areas where you're not allowed to touch anything? So if they've got a database server, maybe there's a lot of really sensitive data on it and they're a little hesitant and they may put a don't touch this clause into the scope. So there's a lot of different reasons why they may exclude areas from the scope. And if they exclude them, trust their reasons and listen to what they have to say in terms of this is what we want you to accomplish. So along those lines, you really need to get sign-off from the target organization. We've talked about this before. This is certainly all about ethics and trust, and it's also about legality, because if you do something that you don't have permission to do, you could be prosecuted for that. So definitely get the scope very clear and in writing, and with signatures attached to it as to what you can and can't do. Always get approval from the right people. Make sure you get somebody who has the right level of permissions and is the right level of management so that they can sign off on it, understanding and accepting the risk that is associated with a penetration test. So let me talk a little bit about security assessments and how they differ from penetration tests. A security assessment is a hand-in-hand approach with the client. So you would walk in doing a collaborative thing where you're a trusted partner and ally with them, And your goal isn't to penetrate them and point out all of the things that are really bad, but it's to get a full assessment of the risk that the organization is exposed to. You would probably provide more detail about fixes than maybe you would in a penetration test. What we're going to do is we're going to walk in and make sure that the policies and procedures they have in place are really what they need for the organization and the risk appetite that they've got. And we're going to make sure that the policies and procedures have controls that can tell us whether they are being actually adhered to or not. So the procedures and policies are being followed. A security assessment is probably a little bit more comprehensive than a penetration test. You would look at more factors to assess the security posture of the organization and their overall risk, and you would tailor the output based on their risk appetite and what they're most interested in. And that's not to say that I'm going to tell them what they want to hear, but if there's something that they know and I know that they're just not going to do, I'm not going to make a big deal out of it because they're already aware of it, and I'll make note of it in the report just for completeness sake, but I'm not going to go into a lot of detail. So it's really kind of a hand-in-hand collaborative approach where, again, we're not just saying what they want us to say, we're providing some real security and risk guidance toward their activities. The other thing about a penetration test is it may provide an unrealistic view. So you've got a week, let's say, to do this penetration test against your target. Now you're going to have to go in, you're going to have to get set up, and you're also going to have to start doing a bunch of scans and make sure that you're gathering information and screenshots and data for your reports. You're going to have to do all sorts of activities. Also, during the course of that week, you're going to be engaged in probably beginning to write your report and getting a sense of what it's going to say and what's going to be in it. If you don't actually get any major penetration during the course of that week, the organization may feel like they are quote-unquote secure. That's one of the reasons why penetration testing, while really sexy and showy, is nice and all, but if an organization walks out of it believing that in a week you didn't manage to, get the keys to the kingdom, then they must be secure. That's a really misguided view, because a dedicated, skilled, and motivated attacker isn't going to just take that week or some portion of that week. If they're after something, they're going to dedicate themselves to it and really go after it. So just because you didn't find a penetration in some subset of a week doesn't mean that they are secure and invulnerable to attack. It just means that during the course of that particular week and other circumstances that were in place, you didn't get a penetration that was really significant or major. That's all it means. It doesn't mean anything beyond that. And if an organization walks away feeling like they're secure, then they're going to end up not fixing the real vulnerabilities that may be in place that could expose them to significant risk. So that's penetration testing and scope and security assessments.
Now we'll go through the process of creating the Ubuntu server virtual machine on a Mac. First, we'll click New and click Continue. For the name, we're going to go ahead and choose StatusNet. For operating system, we're going to choose Linux. The version will be Ubuntu. Now we'll click Continue. We'll go with the 512 megabytes of RAM. And now we'll create a new virtual hard disk, just like we did in the Windows option. This hard disk will not be a physical drive, but a file located on your real hard disk. To the virtual machine, this virtual hard disk file will appear as if it's a real hard drive. So we'll go through the Create wizard. We'll choose VDI as our VirtualBox disk image. And here we're going to choose the fixed size option because it provides better performance, but will require that we have 8 gigs of actual disk space available. We'll store the file in the same location that we're storing the virtual machine. 8 gigs will be our default size, and we'll click Continue. Once we've reviewed all the changes we're going to make, we'll click Create to create the VDI virtual disk image. You may note that this process may take a while depending on the speed of your system and how long it takes to create an 8 GB file. Now that our virtual disk file is created, we can now complete the summary of creating our new Ubuntu virtual machine server. And there you have it. Our virtual machine has now been created. But we're going to make a few changes to this virtual machine before we power it on. Now go to the Settings option for our StatusNet virtual machine. In the Settings option, choose the Storage icon. Here you'll see that we have a virtual CD-ROM connected to a virtual IDE controller, and we have our virtual hard drive connected to a virtual SATA controller. We'll choose the CD-ROM drive and click on the icon on the right that looks like a CD. Here you'll choose the virtual CD DVD disk of the Ubuntu server ISO image you downloaded earlier. We'll choose the ISO image and open. Now we'll also tick the Live CD DVD box so that the CD boots when we start the StatusNet server. Now we'll click on the Network option and take a look at how we're attached to the network. In most cases, attaching using NAT routing allows your Mac to basically act as a router to decide where the packets are to be delivered, the information from the internet, to your host computer, your Mac, or your virtual computer, in this case the Ubuntu server. If you want your StatusNet to have its own network address and be seen as a separate entity on the network, you can choose Bridged Adapter and choose your Ethernet or your wireless network connection, whichever one gets you onto your network. For most cases, however, NAT will be perfectly fine. Click OK, and we're now ready to begin our Ubuntu server install.